Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethics Verse. We got a phenomenal one for you today. We got a special 90-minute episode because it's going to take us so long to get through all of this information. I'm joined today with the FTI consulting crew. Round of applause for these guys. These guys are phenomenal. They're the brains of the operation today. We just released this really great, really insightful. I mean, my whole team's collective minds have been blown this week going through the results of this report. It's sort of a state of the affairs of our industry, of our positions, and we're going to be diving deep on a lot of that stuff today. So this is the data behind our most difficult challenges. So I have Angie Gorman, Anne-Marie Wick, and James Congdon, and me. So Anne-Marie is a managing director. Angie is a managing director, and James is a senior director, and he's our data guy. So as always, we want this to be a highly engaging, this is for you, this is not for me, okay? This is for you guys. So we want this to be a highly engaging conversation as usual. So let's break that chat open. Everybody share where you're coming in from today. Share what you had for breakfast today, if you're a breakfast person, and also drop your LinkedIn URL. And I invite you to connect with at least one person today. We're gonna have a challenge at the end as well for next week. Next week, we're gonna be diving deeper on this. Isn't that right, gang? Talking about what our takeaways from this are, how we can use this information to implement our better, to improve our programs and stuff like that. So we invite everyone to invite at least one friend. If you love the Ethics Verse and if you love your friends, you should invite them for next week. So this is the crew. We have phenomenal people here. Everybody here is really smart. Well, 3 out of 4 are real smart. Let me tell you a little bit about Ethico. What we do here, we have a suite of corporate integrity products that help you do the things that only you can do. You are the expert. You shouldn't be shuffling papers around. You should be doing the things that only you can do so you can really start crowdsourcing risk management at scale. So we have case management and exclusion screening, training that doesn't suck, and a bunch of specialty solutions for you to get the pulse of your organization and really drive ethics to the heart of your business. So if we can ever help, please reach out anytime. And follow us on social. You asked, we delivered. You can sign up for the Ethics Verse, so you don't have to sign up for every single one of these. You know you love them all. So these will just show up on your calendar, and you can come anytime. Follow Ethico in the middle. We take all the best clips from our podcast and from the Ethics Verse every single week. So if you can't attend, you can find replays there, and you can see what's coming out. And you can follow me as well if you like. Today we've added a bunch of new books to this thing. So like I'm saying, keep those comments coming. All those things are what drive your odds of getting a book up. A bunch of phenomenal books in our Ethico library, and we're giving away 5 today. Whoops, 5 today. Let's not blow past that too quickly. We're giving away 5 books today. So keep those chats coming. We want your questions along the way. Bring those up. We'll integrate them into our discussion. Any takeaways you get, whatever, please keep those coming. Part of the beauty of the Ethics Verse is the community that we're all a part of. And the more we can do to interact with each other and sharpen each other's saws, the more of an impact we can have in making our world a better workplace. So let's dive in. What do you guys say?
Sounds great.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we are talking about redefining compliance leadership. We were going to have these slides available, if you ask nicely, and we're going to be sending around some infographics, and the full report is going to be available after today. But let's kind of dive into the biggest, highest level takeaways in this report. James, tell us a little bit about the survey methodology, will you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. And really excited to be here today and to talk through the insights. There's some really good insights here in this survey. So let me kick things off by spending a couple of minutes talking through the research methodology here. It's always helpful, I think, just to understand, how we got here, who we surveyed, and the opinions this research is representing. Of course, as a data nerd myself, this is always one of my favorite slides. So I'm pleased to spend some time on this one. Look, as we all know here, there's a lot of change happening in the world of ethics and compliance. Regulatory scrutiny, oversight, they're increasing, and there are new opportunities emerging for compliance professionals to reintroduce themselves to their leadership and lead from the front. And candidly, really, we don't often get to hear from the compliance professionals themselves on the key issues impacting their day-to-day. So this really helped set the tone and provided what I think is a pretty perfect backdrop to conduct this research, which we call Compliance Leadership Redefined. And the title here, Redefined, really aims to put a fine point on how the role of compliance professionals is changing. And importantly, showing that compliance professionals are the ones who can take an active role in redefining how they are perceived moving forward. But obviously, before we redefine, we need to understand the here and now. You know, what's the backdrop compliance professionals are working in right now? Where do they struggle? What are the challenges you're facing? You know, where do you need support? And importantly, I think, where do you see the areas of opportunity? So, of course, to tap into this, we partnered with Nick and our friends at Ethico to conduct this online survey in the summer of 22 of 200 chief compliance officers and equivalent heads of ethics and compliance, representing companies with some aggregate revenue of 2.5 trillion USD, and companies employ more than 600,000 employees globally. These respondents, of course, were sourced through the Ethico family to ensure we had a real quality composition of sample here, and that we're really talking to the people at the forefront of the issues every day. And as you can see as well on this slide, there's a lot of detail here, as you would imagine. Approximately half of the companies we researched are publicly listed in the United States, and many are operating in territories around the world and across a nice wide range of industries as well. So very solid, effective sample to draw these insights from. Now, actually, what I might begin with, before we move to the next slide, something that's quite rare in research, actually, having done this for a number of years now, is to point out an interesting highlight from the methodology itself. Take a look at the job role there in the top left of your screen. What's quite interesting for me here is over half of the respondents we surveyed who are in charge of ethics and compliance for their organization don't have a dedicated compliance title. It almost looks like compliance is being wrapped into existing titles that carry perhaps that legal responsibility, whether it's GCs or CFOs or CHROs, even CEOs. And it's quite interesting that the role of compliance and the title of compliance is seemingly shifting into those roles, perhaps even associated with the potential liabilities. But Anne-Marie, I know you probably have a perspective on this.
Yeah, thanks, James. And sorry, a quick shout out. You know, you're saying what cities people are from. I saw someone say they're from Milwaukee. I'm sorry, I'm sitting in Milwaukee. So a quick shout out to my friend who's out in Milwaukee. So, but yeah, so I digress slightly. But so yeah, your comment is really notable, because when I saw these statistics and we talked about this, and we see that 26% of the survey participants actually have the title of Chief Compliance Officer. And the thought was, well, shoot, shouldn't more people have that title? And actually, so prior being to FTI, I was also in industry. And I've noticed with my peers and actually with my clients is that people don't want that title. They may want, you know, head of compliance, VP of compliance, whatever that title is, without an official Chief Compliance Officer title, for a number of reasons. Their one in primary is legal liability. And so they kind of hedge back and say, I'll be the head, but I don't want to be called the Chief Compliance Officer, because that implies that I've got personal liability, and particularly with the Department of Justice spending so much effort now on having sign-offs by your Chief Compliance Officer on the effectiveness of your compliance program, that people are kind of shying away of having a chief role, a C-suite role, and having a different title.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting trend, right? I mean, it's a little bit of the tail wagging the dog. Right. It's a little, maybe perhaps a little bit of an unintended consequence relative to what I think the spirit behind the DOJ push is. I mean, how do we deal with that? I mean, where does this break down? Do you, just given your experience in-house and, out of house, not outhouse.
Excellent. I'm now going to say consulting is the outhouse. That's fantastic. I love that.
You said it. Well, I said it, I guess.
I love that. I'm putting that on my business card. So, you know, it's embracing the risk. That's the first thing that pops in my mind is embracing the risk. We are all in the profession of risk management here, right? You are participating here because you find compliance important. You know it's critical to the success of your organization, and embrace that risk with being smart about it, right? You know, and so we're going to talk about all the challenges that you're embracing and how to approach them. But you shouldn't shy away from that chief compliance officer title if that is really your role, right? Embrace the risk, but build that support around you so that you are effective and that you don't have risks, unmeasured risks, or risks that are past your appetite. Talk a little bit about risk appetite. So to embrace that title and don't shy away from it. Because frankly, if you're shying away from it, that's kind of a red flag as well, right? Is that if you're shying away from, I don't want the, I know too much liability, well, that's a good opportunity to take a step back and say, why are you fearful of having that title and having that liability? Is there something more that needs to be done within your operations?
You know, when Sarbanes-Oxley came out and CFOs had to sign off on financials, I don't think, this is just, I'm kind of guessing here, but I don't think that there was like a decrease in the number of people that wanted to be CFOs. And I wonder what is different between that and this. Is it the sort of apparatus that's built around financial statements in terms of auditors and external people that can provide some of that assurance for the, you know, that the thing that a CFO is signing is actually like good to go? Or is it that's, you know, on the other hand, chief compliance officers feel a little bit in no man's land, or that they're kind of pigeonholed? I mean, I'm not trying to sort of forecast too much about what we're seeing, what we're going to see today. But I mean, what do you think about that dichotomy or that difference?
Yeah, and I think if you would interview 200 compliance officers, you get 199 different answers, right?
Yeah,
to
you're
that
right.
question, right? But I look at it. So my history is I actually came from the accounting route. I came from public accounting. So I've also lived through Sarbanes-Oxley as well. So I think Sarbanes is a little bit more prescriptive, right? And you know the documents that you're signing, you know there's certain, there's accounting standards, right? Much more prescriptive. And yes, I realize there's a lot of gray in accounting, but work with me here in that it's at least a little bit more prescriptive than we're working on necessarily as it relates to compliance with laws around the globe, right? Particularly if you're an international company. So I think that's where the angst comes, or a little bit of the angst, the difference is it's a little bit more prescriptive in the accounting field than it is in the compliance field. Yeah,
you have the Financial Accounting Standards Board that's sort of the basis for all of the, audits and, GAAP financials and stuff like that. We don't have sort of a similar board on sort of the compliance side. So that may be a source here. Some great comments in the chat. Thank you guys. Somebody wants a book, it looks like. Gretchen said DOJ has stated that in CIAs that compliance officers should not have duties outside of compliance. What do you think about that? And what do we do for somebody who, as Sandra said, sometimes is a director of compliance, information security, and internal audit? How do we balance through that at different organization sizes and so forth?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and then anyone else wants to comment on that. But so I'm also a certified internal auditor. So I'll tie into that part is that internal audit is the independent role. Compliance is never designed to be independent, right? You can design controls, you can design procedures and policies as a compliance professional. You can't as an internal auditor. That impedes your independence.
Yeah,
so of all that you just talked about, I would separate internal audit from compliance because there's two different goals. You should arguably both report up to the audit committee or some other committee of the board, but there's an independence difference between compliance and audit. And then when you get to IT, arguably, I mean, you wouldn't have that person also be the CIO because there's also different risks and requirements. But I'm also realizing I'm speaking to individuals who also are with smaller organizations. Okay, so if you're with a smaller organization and don't have the luxury to have all those types of individuals, at least from the IT perspective, you can build out into IT specialists and internal audit, and IT specialists and compliance can rely on those IT auditors to help you, or you can also outsource some of that work too. But I really challenge with having a compliance person also be the internal audit director because you have different goals and different ways of executing your work from an independence perspective.
That's pretty smart. So hope you guys were writing that down. If not, you can watch the replay because that was a pretty good answer. Thanks for that. So what else are our big takeaways from this methodology? Because I think we could almost spend, don't worry, we're not going to spend a whole hour on numbers, but we can spend a lot of time on this. What are some other big takeaways from your side, Anne or James or Angie?
So I think, one of the biggest takeaways for me has just been that, compliance professionals are from the research clearly not empowered to do the job that, that they're being asked to do, and to, not empowered to run optimal compliance programs. We all think that, you're very effective in what you're able to do in your role, but there's so much more you could do with the right kind of support. And, so ultimately your organizations aren't getting the best that you could give them.
Right.
And ultimately because of that, the culture suffers. And so that was a big takeaway. But we know that also means a lot of opportunity for you. And hopefully that's what we're going to talk a lot about today and next week. How do you grab that opportunity and increase your standing and your influence in the organization?
So, I mean, Angie, maybe we should back up a little bit because, I mean, this has been your kind of passion project. What drove you to kind of spearhead this thing and put this whole thing together?
I've been working, I should say just 2 words about my background, because my background is very different from James or Anne Marie's. I'm a communications professional. My background is internal communications and change management and culture. And for the last several years, I've been applying those skills directly to, almost exclusively to, compliance situations, working with companies who are either under investigation and having to deal with that and make a lot of changes quickly and also change their culture, but also with organizations who are proactively trying to improve their programs and their culture. And, we've just observed that the responsibilities that you all are being asked to take on with all of the increases in scrutiny that, are coming from the government enforcement agencies, next to the influence that you're able to exert, there's a mismatch there. And we wanted to understand more about, what's standing in your way, what are the challenges that you're facing, and how can we then help you deal with that. So that's really what this survey was about. We know that you're very good at your operational jobs. You understand what those are. People understand what those are, but there's the whole softer side of your jobs. And, where can you get more support there? Where can you be more effective there? And that's really kind of what we wanted to delve into. And so that's really what this survey was all about. And it did validate some of our hypotheses. But to be honest, we were pretty surprised by the depth of some of the feeling that came out of this survey, and some of the depth of the disconnects.
Yeah, and we're going to dive into those some more here in a second. I'll weigh in that, what I like about this survey and just the population behind the answers is that it's not overly weighted to just massive companies, or it's not overly weighted to small companies. It's actually a pretty good cross section of like the existence of our function across the economy. So you can see by organization size on the right, like by revenue size, you can see by geography, it's kind of a little bit all over the place. And we have some nice international representation as well. So I think the takeaways that we get from this are kind of reliable in the sense that like, this is a good picture of what the sort of current state of affairs are for our industry. All right. Any other takeaways on this one, guys?
Nope. Okay. The only other point I would add when you just, when you just talked about the differences is that if you look at industry, I'm always, conscientious of highly regulated versus not highly regulated industries. And I think this is a really nice mix of regulated and unregulated, because that compliance function is going to look very different between the 2 types of organizations.
Yeah. And it's also pretty interesting. I think you were talking about this. Well, we'll talk about it some more, I think, a little bit later, but how compliance shows up in different industries is very different, to your point, but also the role and like the purview of compliance in terms of what it's meant to influence is very different in these different industries. You know, I think you were telling us a little bit how healthcare, in healthcare, was this you? If not, take credit for this because this was smart. Healthcare, you know, they have a big compliance spend, but many times it's very limited in terms of like the light bulb hasn't turned on. Oh no, yeah, the light bulb hasn't turned on in terms of the cultural impact. Because when they think compliance, they're just myopically thinking about HIPAA and privacy and stuff like that. Whereas on sort of general industry, while maybe the overall spend in underneath that umbrella might be a little bit lower, the light bulb is turned on to kind of a different degree or maybe a different shade in terms of like the cultural impact that, you know, an ethical organization can have on some of these second and third order things that we influence. And we're going to talk some more about that in a sec.
Yeah, exactly. I can't officially ethically take credit for that,
Well,
but
unofficially you can.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
unofficially, I
agree.
gave you that one. Okay.
Thank you.
I think just to add on to that a little bit, there's an interesting, you know, there's a good split in the survey responses between public and privately held companies too.
Good point. Yep.
And, you know, the government doesn't distinguish that much between whether you're public or private in terms of the standards the ethical standards that they're holding you to. And, you know, sometimes we see quite a big difference in the maturity of the function between a public and a private company.
And what do you think that is? I mean, because that's actually super spot on. You don't get sort of private company treatment where you get sort of graded on a curve. We're all graded on the same sort of rubric. Why is that focus different on the private side, do you think?
Well, I think, you know, public companies are far more used to and prepared to be held to certain standards, you know, on the financial front. And of course, you know, there's a lot of compliance that goes along with that. So they're just more accustomed to having to be transparent and answer to things where, you know, privately held companies have a little more freedom to, you know, not do those things and to operate in some ways, you know, the way they want to. So it's just, I think it's a maturity thing and what your industry has required of you in the past. And those differences play into, you know, what we see in compliance.
That's probably right. All right. So methodology aside, let's dive into this first, our first slide here.
Yeah, let's definitely jump in.
Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, I'm also looking in the chat to see if there's any Brits on the line as well. Hopefully there's a nice international presence on this. If you're from the UK, give me a shout out. So yeah, diving into the research results here, I think this slide is a really important level set for us all to look at. You know, we're seeing compliance being pushed to the forefront of the board's agenda against a backdrop of mounting scrutiny and regulatory pressures, you know, whether it be supply chain issues, inflation, geopolitical uncertainty, COVID-related challenges. All of these issues have exposed companies to increased risk of non-compliance and in turn to potential investigations, financial penalties, scrutiny, you know, and worse. But when we strip all this back and ask how these factors have actually impacted their role as compliance professionals, over half say that the prominence of compliance on the board's agenda has increased over the last 12 months. And likewise, the external pressures are also highly correlated and moving at a similar pace. 48% saying that it's scrutiny from entities such as the SEC, the DOJ, and others on their organization's policies and procedures have also increased over the same time period. So I guess there's two ways to consider this insight when I'm looking at this from a data perspective. The first is to think of it from the stance of, okay, how do I manage this increasing pressure on my role? You know, how do I reassure, how do I talk about compliance, you know, to the board? I mean, perhaps even a step further, how do I translate technical compliance language into operational language for a board audience? Perhaps all very valid and thought-provoking questions to consider. However, on the other hand, I look at this data, I'm keen to get all your take on this as well, almost as a very big opportunity. You know, historically, you could argue compliance has simply been seen as policing execs and not been seen as collaborative partners. You know, there's possibly also been a tendency of not fully understanding what the world of ethics and compliance actually is. But, and there's a big but here, right? This increased visibility, accountability, and importantly, accessibility, right? At the board level, while potentially daunting, could be key really to establishing and elevating the role of what is a compliance professional. You know, stripping back that layer of the unknown and enabling conversations about how do you better allocate resources? How do you create an integrated, proactive program, you know, that can be designed to meet these compliance pressures and also reassure both the board and external entities in equal respect. So I think there's definitely an interesting perspective here on opportunity and how there is an opportunity to potentially capitalize on this increasing interest. I'm keen to get Nick, Angie, Anne-Marie, your take on that.
Yeah, and I'd also like to get everyone in the audience's take on this. So if you look at this, let's just look at the first number, or either one of these actually, like where would you have expected these to be? Put those in the chat because I would have expected these to be way higher. How about you, Anne-Marie? Where do you think, like, were you shocked by this? Did you expect this to be as low as it is?
No, I expect it to be higher. And
Yeah.
To your point, and part of me was thinking, okay, if you do half glass, glass half empty, half full, whatever, let's just look at the first one. 51% say the topics have increased, these compliance topics have increased. On the half full side, I'm thinking, well, maybe the number is low because they're already got it on their agendas and they're already, really focused on this. So now these are the people who are still getting up to speed, and that's why the number is so low, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kind of negative Nelly side of me would say, oh shoot, we've got a lot of work to do to make sure our boards are well educated and understand where the risks are, and we presenting that and giving that opportunity and getting an agenda point on or getting a point on their agenda. So I'm looking at it from two different ways. I'm obviously going to hope for the former, that people are already really focused on this. And now these are the arguably laggers, but I'll be honest. I think we got a mix here that there's some who they're just not putting enough emphasis on this yet.
How about you, Angie? What's your read on this?
My read is that, there's an opportunity here, clearly, whether it's already on their minds and it's increasing, or whether they're not quite catching on yet and these numbers should be higher. The numbers are increasing, and I think that gives compliance officers an opportunity to, step up and take on more of a leadership stance on this. And as Anne-Marie said, make sure, the boards are educated about what you're really being held accountable for, what the companies and the industries are really being held accountable for, but also making sure that, you're starting to shift, if you haven't done this already, shift how you are reporting out to your board. So you're not just going in with the checklist. Here's all the things we got done. Here's the number of investigations we closed, but starting to really connect what you do to the company's strategic initiatives, to the results the company's trying to achieve. I have one client who has done a really great job of tying their initiatives to the company's strategic pillars. And they've labeled it the integrity premium. And they've spelled out, here is how we are supporting each one of these strategic initiatives through what we do in compliance. And, that's a way to get a board to start thinking about what you do a little bit differently than they might be thinking today.
If you're lost in irrelevance in your organization, if you're lost in obscurity, I think it's on you to make yourself relevant. And what better way to do that than to tie your initiatives to the why of the organization? If you're just coming in talking to the board about a bunch of what we did, what we got done, how many investigations and stuff like that, and you're not tying that down to the thing that everybody cares about, whether that's broader impact, whether that's the mission of the company, whether that's bottom line, then you're leaving a bunch of influence on the table and a bunch of efficacy on the table. And so you shouldn't be that puzzled when you go to ask for more money and you're, kind of stuck in this pigeonhole. We have to climb out of these pigeonholes ourselves. James, you said something smart. Everything you say sounds smart, James. So I don't know what it is, but it's pretty good.
I think there's one more Brit on this call, by the way. So looking at the comment there.
You said, many times it seems so daunting for us. Why do you think that is? Anne-Marie, James, Angie, why is that so daunting for us to step into that conversation, do you think?
I mean, perhaps I can kick off with that, because I think it goes a bit to what you were saying there, Nick. It's like going out of your way to redefine how you come across, to this audience, right? And it's, you haven't done it before. You don't really know what the playbook is and how really to engage with that audience in the language and in the tone and tenor that they would expect and be able to operate upon. I think that's one of the key things is, how do you equip these professionals to be able to stay on top of the pressures, but also rise to the occasion and redefine how they speak to and also engage with their leadership?
Yeah.
Good point.
Oh, go ahead, Angie. You go first.
It goes back to, maturity again of the function. If we had a maturity model in front of us, a less mature function is probably acting in a more administrative capacity, which, let's face it, that's pretty much how you've been positioned for a long, long time. But further up on the maturity scale, you are connecting more to strategy. You are showing the business how you're adding value. And as James said, if that's not where you've been, you don't go from, most of the time, from 0 to 60, in 60 seconds. It takes a little work. It takes a little practice. But it is definitely something that, the opportunity is there for people to start doing to help their companies see compliance and ethics and compliance in a different light, in terms of the impact it can have, the positive impact it can have on the business.
Yeah.
Spot on.
If I can add to that, I kind of think it's a double-edged sword when you're in compliance. And let me explain what I mean by that is, when you're reporting to the board as an organization, they're trying to show the best light, right? And obviously you have to be very honest with the board. It's their fiduciary responsibility and yours arguably to make sure that they're getting the right information. But when I sat as the chief internal auditor and I was reporting to the audit committee and the board, I'm independent, right? I can say that, open the kimono, this is where we at, these are the results of our audits, these are our issues, this is what we're working on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As a compliance officer, I'm no longer independent, right? So arguably I could be part of the problem, right? So when you are reporting to the board, you are trying to show the best picture, but you are always got to be ready for that question of, well, what are we doing about this, right? So, and that's where we're going to talk later about the collaboration with the business and helping them and them helping you, right? But it's a big, I think that's also the daunting part, because when you're putting together a board package, it's being scrutinized by all the C-suite. They're the
Right.
ones that are sending it out. So they're looking at your package and they're going to put pressure on you to try to show it in the best light, right? So you need to make sure that you also have your ethical stick in the ground that says, okay, this is the messaging I need to provide appropriately. But I think that's the daunting part, is that that question is going to be, well, now what? And if I can add to that, when I was in industry in one of my chief compliance roles, I reported to both the audit committee and the governance committee. Audit committee, I did a look back. Governance, I did a look forward. Now they all got each other's materials so they could share, what it was, but I think it was really helpful for them to say, okay, this is what we've seen, but now what are you going to do about it? And that's what we did with the governance committee.
Interesting. Let's pull that poll up, Jack. So what do you see as the primary reason compliance topics at your organization are or have been pushed to the forefront? Is it board interest? Is it regulatory or external audit interest? Is it something else? None. We don't see compliance topics rise to the forefront recently. And while you're doing that, I'd love to get you guys to react to this question from Wendy, or this comment from Wendy. Hey, Wendy. Wendy always has something great to add here. She said, curious then, if compliance is already on the agendas, are they getting more time allocated? While our audit committee has ethics and compliance on the agenda each quarter, there are times that the agenda space is only 3 minutes. Then you have to be really surgical with what you're bringing to the board and to the audit committee. I think that's not an uncommon thing. It's like, okay, we got to do this here, slip these guys in while they're, passing out sandwiches before, we break for lunch or something, right? Like, how do we deal with that? And how do we push that time from 3 minutes? I mean, it's great to be surgical and all that, but we also need to be impactful over surgical, I think,
Exactly. And I realize, I get it. They are shoving a lot of stuff into agendas, right? And I get that. But 3 minutes is not, you might have been just exaggerating, but you need a good 10 to 15, right? And some people may be saying, oh, Anne-Marie, I need a whole lot more than that. But remember, you start setting stage gates right here, right? Start with 10 to 15. If push comes to shove and you are not going to get more than 3 to 5 minutes, which is a shame, make sure you're getting that private session with them. And
That's a great hack.
that private session is more than 3 to 5 minutes, right? That it is the time that you're getting to chat with the board, to more discuss what you presented, because your board's pre-reading, right? They get it. Maybe they only need 3-5 minutes to get to, in a larger setting, but make sure you have that private session. That's when you really, really can have a meaty discussion.
I mean, the number one thing that a board, if you could boil everything down to what a board cares about, it's a fiduciary duty on behalf of the shareholders to make sure that value is created, right? That can be defined a bunch of different ways, and we can debate what that means. But I think there's a big opportunity to have those private sessions if we're willing to exert ourselves into those conversations, because it's their duty to have a high confidence interval that their fiduciary duty is being fulfilled. And a great way to show whether it is or isn't is the state of health of the ethics and the compliance program. But again, it takes our kind of high agency to step into those conversations and to drive those conversations forward.
Exactly.
And I would just add on to, as a communications person whose time often gets chopped and you end up with your 3 minutes, go in there ready for that to happen and know exactly what it is you need to get across. What are the headlines? They've done the pre-read, as Anne Marie said. What are the headlines? What are the things you really need them to walk away with, and be ready if you've only got 3 minutes, to make sure you get those things out and then get your private meeting afterwards.
Yeah, there's an old, maybe it's a vaudeville line of always leave them wanting more. So come out with those high level takeaways. And if they want to double click on them, you're going to be conscientious enough. You will have done your homework and really be able to show that if you can drive the conversation there. Jack, let's close the poll and see what everybody said here. Okay, so about half of us said regular or external regulator or external audit interest, and then a quarter said board interest. So about 75% were across those first two, and then we still have 13% saying none. So I gotta say, there's almost 200 people in this thing, and we only had 100 people vote. So I'm sure on the next one we're gonna have a really high participation. Any surprises from panelists on the results of this in this poll?
I don't know if I'm surprised, because if you're with a company who doesn't have a board, right, a smaller, like a privately held that doesn't have a board, that could be another driver of your answer.
Yeah.
I'd be really curious for those who could write in the chat what the other is, right? So what is the primary reason other than regulatory or board interest? I'd be kind of curious for those who marked other. And then for those who are in the none category, wow, what a great opportunity for you.
Yeah, drop those in the chat, and we'll circle back to those as James takes us through this slide. This slide, good thing I was laying down when I read this, because I would have fallen out of my chair when I read this one.
It is fascinating, and I'm going to try and do this with my slides as well. Leave everyone wanting more, right? That's the ultimate goal of research. Look, I think when I take a step back on this slide, it does build upon the increased scrutiny from the board and the external entities. So in one respect, it's no surprise that compliance professionals are feeling the pressure to demonstrate the effectiveness of the programs they have to leadership. It's almost like the next step, right? I think what we're seeing here on this slide is there is far more engagement from the wider business. 54% there, noting an increase in senior leadership's review of compliance policies and procedures over the last 12 months. So it does correlate with what we're seeing as it rising on the board's agenda. Essentially, senior leadership too want to understand more about what the compliance programs they have in place are. Are they fit for purpose? And quite frankly, we can probably all imagine this would be another question they'll be asking. How much are they spending on compliance? Are they getting value for money? What are they putting in, and what are they getting back out of that investment? And that's really what's super interesting for me here, is that as the compliance continues to move up the corporate agenda, you can see on the other side of the screen here, nearly half of compliance professionals say they've been asked by leadership to present ROI on their compliance programs. Now, obviously, you'd expect publicly traded companies and global companies to have that level of expectation on them. But I guess for me, this presents the question, how prepared are compliance professionals to communicate ROI? How do you meaningfully define ROI, of a compliance program? Is it the potential amount of revenue lost, due to non-compliance? Is it perhaps even the, potential of employee retention? I'm super intrigued actually to get the audience's view on this as well. I think that we should definitely ask the crowd here as well to see what they think ROI means in the setting of a compliance program.
Yeah, please drop that in the chat. Anne-Marie, I'd love to hear your comments about some people answered what the other was. So I want to circle back to that, but please drop into the chat now James's, answers to James's question of like, what does ROI mean to you? I'll tell you from my standpoint, we've started doing these ROI sessions with folks. And, I have a finance background, so I like kind of nerd out on this stuff. And I have a private equity background. So I've been in like, I don't know, it seems like hundreds of board meetings. So this is like the language that, we've always spoken. And when I got into this industry, I just saw that there was a lot of folks that aren't comfortable having these discussions. I was talking to a compliance officer earlier today, actually, about this topic. And she said, I went into law school because I didn't really like numbers. And then now it's like, I need to speak numbers in order to get the stuff I need to do my job, And so what I've seen time and time again is that we have kind of a one, maybe two-dimensional view of ROI, and we seem to have trouble taking credit for or incorporating into our ROI equation the second and third order impacts that our cultures of integrity drive. And you alluded to some of those, James: employee engagement, turnover, found revenue. There's 100 different things that we can point to and drag into our ROI discussions with actually a high level of credibility. We can really do it in an extremely conservative way so that you're not, coming in and getting laughed out of the boardroom. But we just have to, I think, reframe a little bit because, I'll ask this question in a second, but if we can reframe our role a little bit, I think we can turn the light bulbs on at the top a lot better. I've said this before, but like either we're all just a bunch of idiots and this is just some bizarre echo chamber where we're just saying, oh man, our company should be more, we should have more integrity in our companies, and nobody is hearing it. And everybody else who doesn't get it is correct, or we're actually right. And if in fact we're right, it's up to us to turn those light bulbs on. And so in order to do that, we have to figure out a way to pick the lock. We have to figure out a way to speak it into their minds in a way that they understand so that those light bulbs can turn on. Because look, we know that there's an ethical premium out there. We know that, companies that, the world's most ethical companies trade at almost a 25% premium to their, to their peer group. So it shows up somewhere, but we just have to have the boldness to bring that into our discussion. Because I was just kind of shocked that only half have asked to show the ROI.
Yeah,
I would have expected that to be a lot more. And I also know that in probably 95% of the conversations in these like ROI sessions that we do for folks, people don't feel equipped to have that conversation in like a really compelling way.
Yep. No, and I agree. And I know, Nick, you're very well versed in this, and you provided so many of the risks and opportunities discussing this. And I'm also reading the chats, and we're all on the same page that it's hard to put a number to it, right? As contrast to a financial ROI, because what we're doing is we're mitigating risk, right? And so how do we say, well, this would have happened, or we avoided this horrible situation, or we reduced it? Like, how do you translate that into numbers that the executives are trying to look at when they think of ROI? Right. And I wholeheartedly agree with the surprise on only 50% have been asked. I'm like, well, they will, if you haven't been asked yet, they will. Because when, it's always the answer to budget questions. It's always that when there's budget cuts, they need to say, all right, support why you need X amount of money and X amount of headcount to be able to deliver on that. And, we've talked before, the running joke that I used in industry is I'd see the CEO in the hallway and I said, yep, another day you're not in an orange jumpsuit. we said we do it in jest. I mean, he's a very ethical man, but we would jest. It's like, okay, I'm keeping you in your office, and you still get to do your job. So, good for me. So that's how I used to say it, but just from a running joke. But that obviously you can't put on paper. So.
And, this is something that I've lived with my entire career, because communications is another one of those functions that it's hard to tie directly to a business result. But we have to find a way to draw that dotted line, even if it's only dotted. And we'll talk more about this next week, but we like to talk about it in terms of, what are the different things that we can measure in compliance? We can measure the things that we can count, right? So the things that we do, how many trainings did we have? How many people completed? How many investigations did we complete? All of those kinds of things that you're already counting. The next level up is we can measure, what behavioral and attitude changes can we observe? That's harder to measure. It requires qualitative and quantitative research, surveys, focus groups, conversations with your leaders, those kinds of things. But it's the only way to get at that kind of information. And then that third order that Nick is referencing is, what are the business results that we can impact? Employee retention, absolutely one of them. Attracting talent is another one. Cost avoidance through some of the things that Anne Marie's just talking about, reputation, brand loyalty, all of these things, the opportunity costs of the time that you can't spend focusing on your business because your executives are in a hearing or something. So we've got to connect the dots to all of those things. And it's not easy, but it can be done. And we have to get beyond that first level of what are the things we can count, because people don't connect that to the business results. And that's what we need to get.
I think a lot of us have this illusion that marketing, just to use them as an example, marketing is not a cost center. It's so much easier for marketing to talk about ROI. In very few cases can marketing's efforts and dollars be directly pointed to conversions. It's like the holy grail of marketing that no one is able to really get. And so you do a bunch of alchemical math to kind of prove, marketing efficacy and so forth. But I'm just saying, marketing is not walking in handshaking, talking about getting more money from the board. And they have mechanisms to do that, to, credibly talk about based on a series of, reasonable assumptions, what their ROI is. So I think we can learn a lot from our friends in marketing to really drive some more of those conversations forward. But looking at the following statements, there's some great discussion questions on the bottom here. I'd love to hear from the audience as well. Looking at these statements, how have some of these things changed in your organization in the last 12 months? Let's jump to the next question. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Sounds good.
Let's do that poll, Jack. Have you guys in the audience, have you been asked to provide an ROI on your compliance program? So there's a lot of great, I'd love as we're getting these answers in, Carrie said something interesting here, and I'd love to get the response from some of the folks in the panel. So she said, I'm a compliance committee of one, so my salary and costs of conferences and trainings like travel, hotels, etc., would be costs. I'm actually not sure how to quantify ROI. Hopefully we're able to defend healthcare claims that are audited and therefore keep the revenue that would be lost without compliance. Also, I believe employees join and stay in ethical companies. Avoiding employee turnover would be reduced. I would love to discuss more. I think she's on the right track here. I think she's absolutely spot on, but let's start with sort of some of those first ones. How would you approach that? If the CEO is like, well, what's the ROI of this conference?
Go ahead, Angie. I was going to say, I think, that falls into the realm of, professional development, for Carrie, and, keeping her skills up. And there's typically some kind of budget for that for all employees. So that's that piece, if you're looking for ROI on a conference. But hopefully it's more than that, she's going to be reporting on.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, to tie in on the conference, and then I'll tie in a little bit broader, is I used to have to give especially if it was a very expensive conference, I'd have to say, okay, why are you spending this money here? I'd show them on the agenda and say, these are certain things I want to go to because I want to either, learn new things or, heighten my awareness of it. But I'm going to use it when I come back as part of board reporting, as part of training, as part of, and particularly if you're a department of one, this is where I'm going to be able to leverage peers and resources and benchmarking to be able to better do my job. And that, was always a good opportunity. But I want to touch on that benchmarking piece again, is whether if you've avoided risks in the sense of how much time are you spending on legal costs, et cetera, right? And if you can balance that. But you can benchmark as well to the industry and be able to say, with my size of my department, as compared to legal costs or legal expenses, and this is easier, with publicly reliable information, and benchmark where you're spending on legal costs, or if you want to do the risk avoidance piece of it, right? I love Angie's side of it, because she takes the positive side, the employee retention, the growth, the people are able to articulate, and they know where your policies and code of conduct is. They're just, they're not just check the box people, they understand it. So, but to be able to benchmark your organization is also really telling if you're really forced to support the numbers.
I think that's a great point. And I think, the more flavor profiles in the ROI dish we serve up to the diverse group of people that control the purse strings for our program, the better. So we need to talk about that risk piece. We need to talk about that strategic impact or that efficacy piece of retention and stuff like that. And we need to talk about the efficiency piece. If we're singing a song of one note, that very soon, sounds like a horn or something, you know what I'm saying? Like, we need to have a bunch of different angles to resonate with this diverse group of decision makers. So let's look at these results. 80% of people are not asked to provide ROI on their compliance program. To me, this is like a massive red flag. It kind of infer, what I'm inferring from this, maybe I'm being negative Nikki today, but I'm kind of inferring from this that no one is even thinking to ask it, because it's like, what's my ROI for my oil change? I just have to do it. It's like, it seems like this check the box thing is like on everybody's backs based on my read of this data. What do you guys think?
Right. Sorry, I'm jumping in on this one, because this one kind of got me a little excited, that I'm like, why aren't you being asked this? And the first thought was, your budget's not big enough. So they're not even looking at it, going, moving on to something we're spending more money on.
Even better point. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, okay, you need to be pushing then, don't say, hey,
great point.
Let me just voluntarily give you my ROI. You flip it. You say, this is what I'm doing for the organization, but this is what I'm precluded from doing. And this is the dollars that I'm seeking. Then you may get that question of the ROI. But if they're not asking you, you're lost in the rounding, right?
Huge point.
I think you need to want that question to be asked, even though it's really difficult to answer, to get that budget up, start pushing the envelope.
Yeah. And, something that my brother says, which I love, is to really start with, this is a great psychological hack when you're asking for more money. Just ask our board. We say, like, this is how much I'm going to need 5 years from now. And they should fall out of their chair by that number. And that's going to put us kind of on par with what everybody else is spending at an organization of this size. But all I'm asking for right now is this, and that should be a meaningful bump. And you should have, the sort of multi-factor way to calculate that, and, all your backup for it. But just anchoring them to a larger number can really have a big impact on what you end up getting down the road.
Yep.
Okay. Great points there. All right, James, take us through this one.
There are some slides, Nick, where you just know it's going to instigate a conversation. That was one of them. I was very excited to see some of these answers come through on the chat. Great engagement here. Look, obviously, despite the increase in scrutiny and pressures that I've already touched upon, our research also found the compliance professionals aren't feeling adequately equipped or empowered to fully manage their compliance programs and have those conversations. To Angie's point earlier on, look, to me, this is pretty huge. Compliance professionals need to feel, but also be empowered to lead their compliance programs. It's nonsensical. That's not the way. As we all know here, compliance functions always perform best when they're embedded in an organization's key business decisions and the processes. But when we look at the survey results here, they don't feel they have enough authority to provide honest feedback on their organization's performance, nor do they feel they have the influence among their C-suite peers to meaningfully contribute to all aspects of the business. From again, looking through this data and trying to interpret it, to me, this feels like a real open goal for compliance professionals and their organizations. Within the four walls of an organization, you should be able to encourage that honest discourse, right? You should be able to ask those tough questions.
Right.
Are we allocating resources appropriately and correctly? Are we thinking the right way about compliance? What do we do if there's a compliance issue? How do we solve it? I mean, perhaps even critically, is our compliance program fit for purpose? If compliance professionals can't have those honest, open conversations, that's a real worry.
100%. Is it fit for purpose? What a way to put that. I mean, that's so spot on. It's like, are we just like declawed kittens? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a bizarre way to be. There is a better way. There is a promised land that we're heading to. But I mean, look at this. 3 out of 5 people don't have enough independence to provide honest feedback. I mean, it's wild. What are your thoughts on this, Angie?
The big thought I have here is really on the other figure, the 33% who say they, only 33% have the influence to be a strong partner with the business. And this is where, some of these things we were talking about before, relevance and, being able to talk about what you do in a way that the business understands and finds relevant and can connect to their ability to do their jobs. And, taking on, more of a leadership role there. That's something that, we can make a difference in, right now, today, just by sort of changing maybe how we approach the job. Because that's a really low number. And, it becomes about, not behaving as and being viewed as an administrative function and becoming more of a business partner, which, might require you to know, perhaps more about the business than you know today. And to talk to those business people in a different way than maybe you have in the past. But that's a number we can make a difference in, and it's pretty low. So would love to see that happening.
Ann?
Yeah, and so one thing that just to focus on too is the black bold words before the charts that say who strongly agree, right? So these are like high numbers for those who strongly. That's like the end of the box of the survey, right? Is that right. Yeah, I don't have, So with the independence, that's a cultural issue, and Angie can talk all day on the cultural issues as with regards to being able to step up and not have that fear. Because technically you're not independent of operations, but you still have to be the mind's eye and be able to speak freely, right? But to Angie's point, the one that's even more shocking is, well, I shouldn't say more shocking. I can completely understand this 33% about the influence of a strong partner. And if I may, just a quick kind of illustration from when I was in industry is I developed a new compliance program. For those, my friends here who are a party of one, I started as a party of one, and then I had an intern who helped me, right? A law at school intern, which I highly recommend hiring law school interns. They're fantastic.
And free, but anyway, sometimes.
I had to quickly partner with the business, and the first reaction was, well, you're the Department of No. You're the sales prevention department. That was actually what they titled me, like, as I was walking in the door. You're the sales prevention department. I'm like, well, no. I'm like, trust me on this, right? And I played a game with the sales department because we were selling internationally. We were selling through distributors, very high risk. And I said, all right, we're going to play a little game here. I want you to look back, we're going to work together for a while. And I want you to tell me, how many times did I actually say, no, you can't do this? And how many times did I say, absolutely yes, but also the yes, but help me help you get there, right? Because, we just need to tweak this. We need to do certain things. Maybe we need to have certain documents signed. Maybe we need to set up certain processes or whatever the case may be, some parameters to protect us as an organization. But I'm not going to say outright no. I'm going to say yes, but, or yes, right? And not outright no. So we played this game throughout the year, and we look back and they said, you're right, Amory, we can't be calling you this department because you actually only said no twice. One of it was sales into Iran. So sorry, can't help you with that one. I don't care how much you stretch, right? And frankly, that's not my fault. That was the US government's fault. So I arguably don't call that as a no on my part. And then the other one was just we couldn't get the organization to whom we were selling to commit to certain parameters. So, but all the rest throughout the entire year were yeses. And so they're like, we get it, Amory. You are trying to help us and you're actually educating us in the process. So when they came to me, they actually had the answers to the questions they knew I was going to ask, right? So they became more efficient in the process and I wasn't slowing down the process. That was their other key is you can't slow us down. We need to sell right away. It's like, okay, let's work together and figure out how we're going to do this efficiently. So it took some time, but at least I got them from calling me a department of no to, hey, Amory's going to help us out. We may have to do a little work here, but we're going to get there. So that was very impactful for me.
But you have to drive it forward. You have to take the steering wheel of your life in your hands and drive that car where you want it to be. And if you just waited for everyone to, for all those ideas or, for all those ideas to be turned over and, on their own, it would have taken you 20 years or maybe never. So you have to talk about the elephant in the room. You have to address that objection, whether it's explicit, like it was for you walking the door, or just assume that it's implicit and attack that head on. It's really a powerful way to shatter a misconception that a lot of us feel we have, and to break out of this prison, this sort of cost center prison or whatever this thing is, and really lead into this thing, which, the DOJ isn't suggesting this. They're saying that we can't be separate from the business. We have to be integrated with the business. So it's not like a nice to have, it's a must have, but it's on us to make sure that that circulatory system that we can be is functioning properly and sending those nutrients and integrating right into all these different organs that, is the body of the business.
I mean, I had one quite pushy salesperson who didn't want to play that game with me. And I told him, I said, I don't know, my paycheck's signed by the same person as yours. So I have the same vested interest as you do for the company to be successful, right? But we got to do it in an appropriate way, right? So in an ethical, within the legal standards, et cetera. So I said, but I have the same, I report up arguably to the same group of people and same person signs my paycheck. And, he kind of stepped back and goes, okay, I get it. You're not the bad guy. You have a job to do. And, we got through it. Right. But just so that people understand, you're part of that same organization and we're successful too.
Yeah. Don't fall victim to the otherism that inevitably creeps into every organization. To your point, Anne-Marie, you're all wearing the same jersey. The battle is not in the four walls of your organization. The battle is in the marketplace. And the sooner we can step out of that otherism, step out of that shadow of otherism that many of us find ourselves living in, the more authentic relationships we can actually build. I'm sure your relationship with this person changed dramatically after that kind of, tough conversation you had.
He actually became my best advocate. He actually did.
Amazing.
He was an international
Funny how that
sales
works.
guy, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, go to Amory. She's going to help you out." But he was honest. He said, "She's going to ask tough questions, but she's going to help you." So
I love it. Okay. So good thing I was laying down because I passed out on this one. I literally passed out for 7 minutes on this one. Walk us through this one, James.
Yeah, let me just read this to you because this, likewise, it's a pretty incredible slide and an incredible data point here. Large proportions of compliance professionals say they do not have significant authority over key compliance-related decisions, like managing their compliance program or providing strategic direction on their company's compliance risks. I mean, honestly, the fact that 51% do not have significant input into the direction of the programs they're tasked with managing, to me, is incredible. And almost like as a 1-2 punch here, the fact that almost 40% claim they do not have significant input in the program design, the development, the implementation. Honestly, for me, these are probably the two most staggering parts of this study. We want to be seeing 100% here, right? We want to be seeing these pie charts hitting 100%. We want all compliance professionals to say they have and they feel like they have the authority and input into their programs. And honestly, Nick, when you what you were saying there in the previous slide, when you add into the mix the fact that DOJ, the SEC have issued a number of statements stressing the importance of empowering compliance professionals to develop, implement, enforce policies and procedures in an integrated manner, the fact that we're seeing data like this really is staggering.
It's wild. I mean, imagine if this was a marketing survey and it was a bunch of chief marketing officers and 51% of them had no significant input into providing strategic direction into the executive team on marketing topics. And imagine if they also only 38% had significant input on designing and implementing their marketing programs. I mean, that would be absolutely bizarre, but that's the state of affairs right now for us.
Yeah. I also about fell out of my chair when I read this one. This is one of the most surprising findings to me, because you're right, Nick. I mean, marketing people would go wild if they were put in this situation. Yeah, I'm kind of speechless about it because it's really surprising.
And I'm kind of in the chat. A lot of the people joining us today are also surprised, right? You know, because they're like, wow, really? What are they actually doing then, right? Yeah, and particularly in that 38%, they don't have a significant input. I mean, so we're saying 62% do, which is good, but it should be 100%. But the 38%, it's like, well, you know, I can only speculate, right? That they inherited a program and they don't have the authority to make modifications, or they have an overzealous C-suite that just wants to do it their way and they're giving them the latitude. It's just, that's not the culture we want to be in at all, right? And so, because otherwise I scratch my head too. I don't know how that can happen.
How about this one? Walk us
Probably
through
one
this
of my
James.
favorite slides, actually. It's interesting because it shows quite a compelling gap between, you know, what you call perception and reality.
Yep.
I think if we look at the dark blue bars here in particular, they represent the views of CCOs and heads of ethics and compliance. And working from the top down here, you know, just over half strongly agree they're reporting to the right person in their organization. So, you know, this isn't wholly unique to compliance professionals. We've seen this with other technical legal roles in the past as well. You know, it's just the way sometimes the structures fall, right? We understand there are roles that combine and roles that shift. It might be interesting over time to see how this one works itself out, if it works itself out. I almost wonder if we do this again, that could be one that we focus on. But I think where my interest peaked on this slide is the next two bars. The perception that their compliance role is not clearly defined, and a sizable amount believe senior leadership struggle to understand the full scope of their role. You know, so when I look at the so what here, you know, it is about taking career objectives, you know, what your actions are into your own hands here. It's a big opportunity for compliance professionals to move the needle themselves, to talk about what they're doing from a proactive perspective, to help senior leadership better understand that role, right? We're already seeing an increase in compliance. The door is already open to that conversation and to help elevate the understanding of the role and its importance in building that strong ethics and compliance culture throughout the business. So it's quite an interesting set of data here, I think.
Anne-Marie?
Yeah, James, I'm nodding profusely here because you said the key word, and then some of our friends here have also noted in the chat, you should just put a big red word across this whole slide that says opportunity.
100%.
Right? So particularly in the last 2 points, my role is clearly and properly defined and senior leadership fully understands. That's where you, no matter what your role is, has an opportunity to define it and to educate, right? You have no strings on you to articulately define what you do and or should be doing, and then educate, right? So that ball is firmly in your court, okay? Now, I didn't say everyone's going to listen, but it's firmly in your court to drive, okay? I'm reporting to the right person within the organization. I realize that can be a struggle. When I was going into a newly designed role, the CEO said, where should this fall? And I said, I need to report to you. And he said, I've already got 17 direct reports. Fine, you got to give me someone else. And I'm like, okay, but at least I planted the seed, right? I ended up reporting to the general counsel, but I had regular meetings with the CEO. So I'm like, okay, I got at least half of what I wanted, right? So I realized that when your role is already established, it might be hard to shift where it reports. That's probably the hardest one of these three. But the last two, nope, that ball's your near court. That's a great opportunity for you.
You know, oddly, when I've eaten 17 fun-sized Snicker bars, eating that one extra is not that big of a deal. So I feel like he could have slotted you in, but whatever. I'm not gonna, who knows? But I think you're right. It's a ton of opportunity here, right? That's what, we're getting, we got a couple more slides to get through, but, I think some people are going to look at this whole thing and they're going to think, oh my gosh, this is brutal. And I would say this is brutally amazing that we have this much opportunity to change our lot in life. If these were all 99% and everybody, still felt this way, then I would say, well, yeah, maybe everybody is right. And we are, these light bulbs are never going to turn on because our light bulb is sort of erroneously on. I think there's a ton of opportunity. Deborah said the same thing. You said the same thing. In our pre-show, we were just talking about all these opportunities for us to expand our influence and take advantage of the foundation that's been laid over the last 20 years. The next 10 years should look way different than the last 20 years. We got a couple more slides. How many more slides do we have, James? We got a few more, don't we?
3 or 4, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I can speed through a couple of these because I think a lot of it is really building upon the previous point. It shows a bit of a progression of story here.
Right.
The fact that, if leadership don't understand what you do, they're going to not really fully understand how it can incorporate you and perceive compliance at large, right? So what we're seeing on this slide is there is a tendency that compliance and senior leadership do not always see eye to eye. 59% surveyed agree that leadership is actually more interested in efficiencies rather than effectiveness at times. And, for example, what does that look like? Is that like we send a survey out and we tick a box?
Right.
Versus something that's more robust, more overarching, more measurable, going back to the ROI points, right? So maybe there are some elements around that driving that particular statistic. And then to go a step further, the stat below shows that 2 in 5 feel pressure to downplay risks when presenting to the board. Now, when you combine that stat with the fact that it's rising on the board's agenda, they've got increasing opportunities to engage and access the board. What I'm interested really about this particular stat is, why do they feel like they've got to downplay that? They should be feeling empowered to go to their leadership and say, hey, we've got a problem here. We need to figure this out, versus no problem, we're all good. It's an interesting, finely balanced percentage. And I think it does point to the broader point around accessibility, ownership, right, and understanding of the compliance role.
What do you think, Angie?
I think this goes back to a conversation we had earlier about, how heavily edited board presentations get, and, the number of topics that are typically crammed onto an agenda, and compliance is going to be one of those that's always on the losing end of that. So yeah, it's tough, but again, the leadership, the relationship building, the, taking the mantle and starting to shift the view is the only thing that's going to change that.
And Anne-Marie, when you start thinking about, 60% say, leadership's more interested in efficiency than effectiveness, and you reflect on your experience both and the consulting side and, standing up programs and being in-house, this is not like an uncommon thing, obviously. How do we effectuate that change, and how do we get, leadership to kind of shift their focus and understand that effectiveness is more important?
Yeah, and I'd almost say you can still have both, right?
100%,
you
yeah.
don't have to have a slow me down compliance program, right? And so it kind of ties into what I was describing before with the salesperson is, yeah, I had to ask a few more questions, to get through some more higher risk transactions, but we got them there. So arguably sales could say, well, you slow me down, it's not as efficient. Got effectiveness, right? But it's that collaboration, right? If you guys are all talking the same language, and I say all you guys, meaning within operations, and you understand what everyone's goals are and how to get there, you can make it very efficient, right? The startup might be a little slow and a little clunky. Okay, I get that. But once you're really integrated into the organization, it's more smooth sailing. And then you can prove the efficiency. And that's a nice way of doing it too, is on the startup, you say, okay, we implemented this new process, and it took us 3 days to get from A to B, right? Over a couple months, we got it down to a day and a half. Or, you show that progress, that you understand that you have to be efficient. It's just, get that collaboration and track how you are being efficient to help the business. Give them data.
Yeah, and don't get scared about those startup costs. I mean, when your company does an acquisition, they know that they're going to be spending a bunch of money. That's not going to be run rate money. That once the acquisition is absorbed into the company, that's not what the company's going to actually, ultimately experience. And they go to their lenders and they go to their buyers and their private equity owners, and they say, okay, these are all the expenses, but take these out because those kind of don't count. These aren't really costs that we're going to see on a go forward basis. So we need to take some of those notes in our pitches to really not just to speak their language, but to make sure that they're looking at it right, and make sure that we're frankly looking at it right. If you're switching vendors and you have to spend an extra 10% this year, and you have a good confidence that you're going to be with them for a long time, and that 10% is going to go away very quickly with the efficiency savings and so forth, don't let that 10% sort of switching cost, deter you from doing what's best for your business over the long term.
Exactly. And, you always want to lead with the carrot and not the stick. But if push comes to shove, you say the Department of Justice doesn't give a darn about efficiency, but they certainly do care about effectiveness. Again, that's the last resort argument. You're leading with carrot with the other things we've talked about.
Right. How about this one, James?
Yeah, this is quite an interesting one actually to talk through, and actually places the potential misalignment of objectives we're talking about here into a pretty sharp focus.
Yeah.
The culture of compliance goes hand in hand with business performance. We all know that, and when properly supported, compliance programs can contribute to the bottom line through cost avoidance and strengthening competitive advantages and the like. However, this slide really shows to me there's a common misconception among leaders in terms of how compliance is viewed when balanced with wider revenue and operational goals of the business. To Anne-Marie's point, you don't have to choose. And when you're looking through the data here, 40% of compliance professionals say their ethics and compliance is not linked to business strategy or KPIs. And more than a third say they feel there are often conflicting incentives or priorities when it comes to upholding a culture of ethics and compliance. They're pretty staggering stats, but perhaps what the most powerful one is on this slide for me is the one right at the bottom. 1 in 3 compliance professionals claim that their organization supports and encourages ethics and compliance as long as it doesn't impede meeting revenue or operational goals. Pretty staggering.
Yeah, when I read this slide, I saw a flash of white light, and then I was floating, and I was looking down. I died, is what I'm saying. I flashed back into my body, took a deep breath, and I was back reading this thing. But when you look at this, Anne-Marie, what are your big takeaways from this?
So my negative Nelly is I'm not surprised that, you're in business. I'm sorry, you're in business to make money. I mean, period. Granted, you should be more ethical and say we're also providing a service, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, business people are looking at the top line. They're looking at the bottom line. Okay. Yeah. So this is, again, and I'm beating the same drum. I'm sounding like a broken record. But it's all related to the communication on that these are not distinct things. Compliance and revenue are not contradictory, okay? You can do both. Ethics and compliance does not impede revenue. You may have to put some parameters, but it doesn't impede it. And frankly, we've seen in statistics that the more ethical, the more compliant, the better your revenue, right? I mean, just think about headlines, right? And there's certain companies, we all have our favorite companies that come to mind, that they were really struggling when that headline hit, right? They do not have to be mutually exclusive. And that's where the communication, the culture, all of that ties in together. And now I'm just repeating myself, but it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. It is, but it's all part of your communication, your approach, and getting that right culture.
Yeah, these are all cultural considerations, and you know, we both in terms of, you know, what are people's attitudes, but also what are the underlying support infrastructures, the things that support cultures, which are things like, you know, compensation and bonus and incentive programs. What are they tied to? Making sure that you're linked to business strategy, and are you being measured on that? Because, you know, let's face it, companies measure what matters.
That's right.
And so if it matters, you should be measuring it. We believe compliance matters, so it should be getting measured too. But we hear a lot of clients ask us, especially on those first two there, how do we do this? How do you link compliance to a KPI? What kind of incentives do you put in place? And, you know, those are tough questions, because they just, you know, a lot of companies don't have a lot of experience with that. But again, it's one of those things, we got to figure it out, right? If it matters, we should be measuring it. And that's how you get it into the culture. The CEO saying it matters is absolutely, you got to have it, but you got to have all of these other pieces too. And so I sadly was not surprised to see these numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you've talked already about people jumping the ship if they don't think that there's a strong culture. We've seen in the chats today, individuals who said, yes, I left my organization because I didn't feel that compliance was supported or ethics was supported. And that runs throughout the organization. So you're not going to be able to be sustainable by not having that right culture.
And, you know, no one will ever say, well, yeah, I'm unethical. No one will ever say that. And they probably, as human beings, most of us aren't unethical, but maybe the whole structure and the culture of the organization and the way they do business has not made clear what ethics really is in our business, and then how we propagate that and how we support it.
Good point. Jack, why don't you drop in this next chat if you don't mind? Let's answer this next poll. Sorry. I'd love to get some responses to these. And, you know, I was kind of struck by this thing. There's almost, you know, to the extent that we think that these are mutually exclusive things, you know, business and ethics or business and compliance, whatever. It's kind of like, you know, someone saying, well, for me to be successful in my job, I can't afford to spend any time in the gym. I can't afford to be healthy. You understand what I'm saying? Obviously, the most successful people, they tend to have a more balanced life. They're carving out those important times to be healthy, to exercise, to make sure that they're eating right and so forth. And all that ends up contributing to their success in this other realm. To your point, Anne-Marie, these are not mutually exclusive things. And we need to break that stigma, and we need to break down this really kind of backward thinking that's going to be on us. So let's see those results, and let's jump to the next slide as well. So it's about 60-40 on not reporting to the board. And for those that do, what do you guys think about these? It's a pretty interesting split.
It is. I mean, to me, it really just emphasizes the fact that, you know, there is the opportunity to have that meaningful seat at the table, you know, right, as these responsibilities continue to increase. Again, reiterating the points I've already made, people aren't having that time. And that needs to happen. That needs to be the next sort of change, the domino to fall, so to speak. You know, we need to move away from those potential 3-minute conversations, right, to having a conversation that's more robust in nature and operational in action.
Yeah. Yep. Try very hard to push for that private session with the board and committee. I know it's hard. They got a tight agenda, but try to get some time with them. And they give it to the external auditors.
Yep.
Give it to the internal auditor, get that time.
We have about a couple minutes left, and I really want to touch on this slide. So I'm going to pull a quick audible here. This one is wild. This one is absolutely nuts. So this concept of a net promoter score is, I think everyone has heard of it. So we asked these 3 questions. Walk us through these, you guys, because this one was just mind-boggling to me. Remember, these are chief compliance officers doing this study, okay?
You know, it's funny because this slide is almost like you sit back and you look at it and you're like, there's a lot of red there, right? And I think walking away from it, it's important to understand the overall perspective of what might happen if some of these issues aren't addressed, right? The frustrations that are felt by compliance professionals and, you know, the potential on the reputation and culture. we did it as an NPS, which essentially is the old school, how likely are you to recommend on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, to really get under the nuance of where are you sitting on this spectrum across a wide range of areas. For me, all of these points are staggering. So an NPS score, anything in the negative numbers is bad, right? That needs to be addressed straight away. I've done this for a number of years. It's rarely you see NPS scores this low, right? It's pretty wild when you look at it in relation to what we're seeing here. But when you read the labels, what are they actually responding to? They are basically discouraging people joining their team. They're discouraging people joining their organization, and they're potentially even discouraging adopting particular compliance programs and initiatives that they're running themselves. And this really is pretty staggering when you take a step back. Talent for compliance officers, and to be involved in this particular role, you need to empower, enable, and promote. And the fact that only, what we're saying here, roughly 1 in 5 would class themselves as promoters of their company's compliance programs really is pretty stark.
So I would say, spot on, of course. I think there's some positivity to pull from all of this. So if you're one of those 1 in 5, you should feel lucky, and you should double down on that. And you should, thank your lucky stars, or thank your boss for the structure that you have in place. If you're one of the ones in orange, you have to at least have some hope that at least half of the people in the world in your position they don't have it as bad as you. So there is hope for you to affect some change. And if you're somewhere in the middle in those passives, it's not that far of a cry to go from a 6 or a 7, or, from a 7 or an 8 to a 9 or a 10, usually with some small tweaks, and usually exhibiting some of the agency that Anne-Marie has talked about, some of the tactics James has talked about, some of the perspectives that Angie has mentioned. We can start to turn those light bulbs on at the top. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to us to drive the change that we want to see in our workplaces by being the change we want to see in the world. If nothing changes, then nothing changes. We have to act a little bit differently. We have to talk with a different posture. We have to bring a different confidence level to these discussions, because the things we do matter. And the nutrients, so to speak, that we bring to our organization actually allow us to drive down that road of business a lot faster. It's right there for us to take it. So next week, I know we're a minute over right now. Next week, we're going to be diving deeper into these numbers and really focusing on some takeaways on how we can improve our lot in life, so to speak. How can we change our current circumstances to accelerate those turning on of the light bulbs, to increase our efficacy across our organization, and ultimately drive more integrity, more authentic integrity to the heart of our business cultures, and ultimately make our workplaces better. So FTI folks, thank you guys so much for coming on. It's been phenomenal. Drop some 9s in the chat if you love them as much as I do. We will be sending around the report. They put together infographics. I mean, this is a great operation. I'll give the final word to the FTI folks, and I hope you guys all come next week. Bring a friend, bring a couple of friends, and let's let this ethics-verse community continue to grow. Back to the FTI folks for the last word.
I'll just say, I love working with people like you. I think, your challenges are so interesting, and we can make a difference. And I hope we'll see you all here next week.